The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back, everyone. I believe we have Ralph Ellis back with us. Ralph, are you there?
I hope I am this time.
Hey, Ralph. Nice hearing you. How are things?
Very, very well. Thanks, Rob. I don't think it liked Firefox, so I'm now on Chrome. So hopefully.
Oh, my gosh. Well, we're glad you're with us. And thank you so much for getting up so early to be with us, Ralph. It's always great talking to you.
Pleasure.
You're still at it. You're still at, the truth behind history and religion. And tell us about your latest adventure.
Yes, I'm not sure when I was last on, but I've gone on to an adventure going up into Edessa and looking at the biblical story coming from a monarchy in Edessa, which is just in northern Syria. And it seems to be quite a lot of information that is what the story was based upon. So
now when we're talking about the story, which story are we talking about?
We're still talking about the gospel story here. So the gospel story was a story about the Jewish revolt in AD 66 to AD 70. That was the revolt that Jesus was involved in because, as we know, he was jailed alongside revolutionaries who committed murder in the revolution, but it never sort of tells us which revolt he was involved in. So the Jewish revolt was the biggest event of the first century. It was the event that caused the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of all the Jews out of Jerusalem, hence the diaspora around Europe. So it was a major event in that era.
So it seems that the Jesus who the Bible portrays as this peace-loving person who went around talking was really a bit of a revolutionary.
Yes, well, there's a dichotomy there because the gospel story says that he was a revolutionary. He told his disciples to go and get swords. He said he didn't come to bring peace to the world. He came to bring a sword and to set father against son and mother against daughter. So there are elements of this revolutionary zeal within the New Testament story. But of course, it was changed, I believe, by the Romans, who did not want anyone praising or venerating a rebel who had rebelled against Rome. And so they changed this story into a story of, peace and love. And they sort of changed the main character, the Jesus character, from being a real king into a pauper prince of peace, because that suited Roman propaganda. They wanted peace in the East. They didn't want any further revolts. And so you have this dichotomy where Jesus is called a king. He's called a sort of peacenik, but he's called a king on 36 occasions. So again, we get this dichotomy within the story. And I think the story was actually based all upon this Edessan monarchy, which has been deleted from history, deliberately so. So if you read the history by Josephus Flavius, they are never mentioned once. The reason is because Rome didn't want you to know anything about them. And so we have a story within this book, within the works of Josephus, about a battle between the king of Petra and the king of Judea, Antipas. And Josephus Flavius will say that the Petran army was joined by some fugitives from Syria. So he's covered it up. But if you read another manuscript out of Syria, written by Moses of Corine, he says that these fugitives were the army of Edessa. So you can see that there has been a cover-up within the works of Josephus. And that is the cover-up that I've been uncovering in my latest books.
Now, talking to you the first time raised a lot of questions to myself, and I always receive a lot of email after you've been on the show because people say, well, why aren't we really learning this? Why have we been given the story that, that church teaches us, that we're taught in school? Why aren't we taught what Ralph is telling us? And what Ralph is telling us makes a lot more sense.
It does, but they're continuing the same propaganda cover-up that the Romans started back in AD 70. So as I say, when the revolt ended, the Romans didn't want you to know anything about this revolt, so they deliberately covered up the leaders of this Jewish revolt, so you wouldn't know anything about them. So that suited their purposes. But then when it came to the Catholic Church taking over from the Romans in the 5th century, when Rome obviously failed in the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire failed.
Right.
They were taken over then by the Catholic popes, who just stepped into that same position, and they kept up the same propaganda because it suited them as well, because they had already crafted this narrative about the pauper Prince of Peace. And so the last thing that they wanted is people knowing that this Jesus character was actually a real king. And the interesting thing I found recently is that we actually have a picture, a fairly early picture from about the 3rd, 4th century of this particular king, who would then be the Jesus character. So this is a very early depiction of Jesus. And it's more akin to what we understand the Jesus character to be, fully bearded, in the traditional sort of fashion. If you see some of the depictions in Rome, they sort of depict Jesus as Apollo, clean shaven, just like Apollo. But of course, Jesus would not have been clean shaven because he was a Nazarene. Both him and Paul were called of the sect of the Nazarene, and the Nazarene did not cut their hair. So they would have been long-haired with a beard in the traditional fashion as we understand it today. And of course, this particular mosaic has him exactly in that fashion. I don't know if you allow screen share. Can I screen share at all and show a picture?
You can try, sure.
So if I go to share and do a share screen, and it will say, what do I want to do? I want to do a window. I want to do that one and share. So that should be coming up. This is an image of the Huckok mosaic.
Oops, hold on here. I have to bring it up over here.
Which was... Right.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, there we go. That looks like it. This is interesting because this was discovered after my book was written. So if anyone looks at my book, Jesus, King of Edessa, you will see this king on the front of my book. But I drew that image. I had it on the front of my book 4 years before this mosaic was actually discovered. So when this mosaic was discovered, I knew exactly what this image was. But the archaeologists on site, Jody Magnus, and she sold this story to National Geographic as being Alexander the Great. So they had this wonderful splash headline saying, Mosaic of Alexander the Great discovered in Judea, because this is in sort of northwestern Galilee. And of course, it's not Alexander the Great at all. And they should have known that, because they had enough academics on site that they should have known what this story is. This cannot be Alexander the Great, because the guy is wearing a Jewish side lock of hair. And he's got a full beard, long hair and a beard, which, of course, Alexander the Great never did. And he's giving a sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem, who's the guy with the white hair on the left. So we know this cannot be Alexander the Great, and yet they sold this story to National Geographic as being Alexander the Great in 300 odd BC. But this is well, I thought it was a well-known story. It's a well-known story from the Talmud, where a guy called Bar Kamsa, who is the leader of the Jewish revolt, gives a sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem, which is exactly what this guy is doing. So this was a picture of the high priest of Jerusalem. Sorry, a picture of the leader of the Jewish revolt giving a sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem in order to start the Jewish revolt. There was a bit of politics going on here. What they wanted is to give this Gentile calf to the high priest, knowing that the high priest would reject it because it was Gentile, it was profane, it was not allowed. And so they would reject it. And this calf had been given by Emperor Nero to the high priest of Jerusalem. And of course, that was going to upset Nero, who was then going to be angry with the Jerusalem priesthood and start the Jewish revolt. Politics was active in that age. It's not something that's been invented recently. This was pure politics in order to start the Jewish revolt.
So when we look at the history, or what I thought to be the history of Jesus as told in the Bible, was he born in a manger? Was he crucified? How false is the biblical story compared to the truth?
Well, actually, I think it's actually very accurate, but
really?
It's just been misinterpreted, because this leader of the Jewish revolt, this fellow from this mosaic we've just looked at, was crucified after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. So this is the leader of the Jewish revolt. He was known as Bar Kamsa, which is a nickname. It's a pseudonym. In Edessa, he was known as King Jesus Manu, King Jesus Emmanuel. And of course, in Edessa, all of the Edessan kings wore a crown of thorns. He's not got it on here, but normally he would be wearing a crown of thorns, which was the traditional crown of the Edessan monarchy. And you also note he's wearing a purple cloak, which is exactly what Jesus was wearing when he was crucified. And that is a symbol of Rome. That is a symbol of the Roman emperor. That's why we know that this revolt was actually a political ploy by this particular king to become the next emperor of Rome, because this purple cloak is a symbol of the emperor of Rome. And that's why Jesus was crucified while wearing a purple cloak. It was a symbol that he was a pretender to the throne of Rome. But the story goes on, and after the Jewish revolt failed, so Rome came into Judea to put down the revolt with command of Vespasian. And after the Jewish revolt, this king was crucified. So there is a story from Josephus Flavius that Josephus himself was coming back into Jerusalem down the Kidron Valley, and he saw the three leaders of the Jewish revolt being crucified. And he was upset by this because they were his former compatriots. Remember, Josephus Flavius had changed sides. So he went to the governor, got permission to take them down early. They were taken down from the cross early. 2 of them died and 1 of them survived. That is the crucifixion story. The only difference between that and the biblical crucifixion story is it happened in AD 70, not in AD 30. So we have this chronological chasm, as I say, where the story has been recast into the AD 30s in order to cover up what it was actually talking about, because Rome didn't want you to know that this was a revolt against Rome in AD 70. And so they recast the story back into AD 30 so you wouldn't know that. And nobody has known about that ever since. Everybody is looking in the AD 30s. And you're not going to find this character in the AD 30s.
So is this character truly the Son of God?
Well, no, that was just a formal title. All of the Egyptian pharaohs were all the son of a god. So, Ramesses is the son of Ra.
Right.
Tuthmoses is the son of Thoth. Moses is the son of the moon god Ar. They were all the sons of God. It was an honorific title, of course, because they were regarded, especially within Edessa and places like this, as the messenger from God. The same as Muhammad, of course, is regarded as the messenger from God.
Yes.
He's not regarded as the son, but he's still the messenger, the angel of God. And that was just an honorific title. In fact, some of the Roman emperors also became sons of God. So, yeah, it was, you could say he was, because that was a formal title.
It was, but it's not the Son of God that is
no. Well, not necessarily.
Through religious philosophies for
you could
Christianity.
Yeah, you could believe that if you wished, but that was not the. It was a title that gave the king power, because if you wanted God to intercede on your behalf, you had to go through the king, because he was the only person who could talk to the God figure. So it gave the king a lot of power.
Are there parallels between Greek mythology and their gods? And well, I guess so, because you were saying before that the depiction of Jesus in the Vatican was that closer to Apollo than to the Nazarene, right?
Yes, there were some similarities with the Greeks, because another thing that's not very well known is that, I'm just quickly looking it up here, the primary symbol of Judaism, of this type of Judaism, Nazarene Judaism, was the zodiac. So if we go around some of the synagogues, the early synagogues dating from the 1st to the 5th century in Judea, you will find there is a large zodiac on the floor. So the primary symbol of Nazarene Judaism was the zodiac, which is interesting because that's not really taught at present. So not many people know that. And the central character in that zodiac is Helios, the sun god. So yes, they were drawing on motifs out of
Greek mythology.
And I'm just sort of stopping here a little bit so I can bring up a image for you. So let me share you this image and see if I'll need to stop that screen. So let me stop that screen and start another one. So if I share screen and share a particular window and go to that window and share, you should have this one come up. And
yeah, there it is.
There it is. And this is a zodiac. This is from the Hakok mosaic. Sorry, no, this one is from Hamat Tiberia, which is on the Sea of Galilee. It's just below Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. And it's in a synagogue. It is a Jewish zodiac. You can see all of the characters there. The traditional characters that we use in the zodiac today are all in Aramaic Hebrew. And this is a first century zodiac, which was owned by Jesus, because Josephus Flavius tells us so. Now, he says that the owner was Jesus of Gamala, who I have already equated with the biblical Jesus, who was the governor of Tiberias in the AD 60s. So this is very interesting, and you'll note that the central character is actually Helios, the sun god, the Greek sun god, which is heretical to start with because we have the Greek sun god on a Jewish zodiac, which is interesting. But note also that the Helios is holding a spherical blue-green earth in his gravitational grasp.
Yes.
You'll see in his left hand there.
Mm-hmm.
Let me zoom in a little bit, perhaps. So the heliocentric model of the solar system was known in this era because the sun is holding the earth in his gravitational grasp. And the head of Helios is pointing between Pisces and Aries. So this is the 1st century. Within precession, of course, all of these constellations of the zodiac move, and Aries turned into Pisces in about AD 10 within precession. And of course, that is why Jesus was born as a Lamb of God, Aries, but became a fisher of men, Pisces. This is all about the precession of the equinox. That's why the Pope, that's why the symbol of Christianity is the fish. It's why the Pope wears the fisher ring, and he wears the fish mitre, the sort of fish mouth mitre, you might say. His formal crown is all based upon these zodiacs. So this was the primary symbolism of Nazarene Judaism, but it's been largely lost from Christianity because all of this was made taboo afterwards. And so people don't realize that early Judaism venerated the zodiac.
Ralph, you and I have to take a break. As always, fascinating talking to you. Thank you for taking time and for getting up so darn early for us today. It's appreciated, Ralph. And by the way, my wife Laura said to say hello to Ralph, the pilot, and the guy who shakes the tree of history. Welcome back, everyone. Ralph ELLIS is our special guest. If you'd like to find more about Ralph or order any of his great books, visit his website at edfu-books.com. All right, Ralph, the Jesus that we know from the Bible certainly does not sound like the Jesus that we're talking about today. How do we know we're talking about the same guy?
Mainly because the history matches. It's very, very similar. So the story that is given in the gospel within my secular story is almost exactly the same. It's almost identical. The only differences between my real history that I've teased out of these texts and the gospel story is that the guy was much more important than the gospel story will admit. So yes, he would have been born in about 86 or where, at the time of Quirinus and the taxation. He might have been born in a sort of stable because this particular royal family had been kicked out of Persia, in AD 4. And so they would have been on the move, without a palace, to have a royal son in. So they might have been in a stable. And this is a royal family who might have been visited by the Persian Magi, the 3 wise men. Why did the Persian Magi come to see the birth of a pauper Jew within Judea? The story doesn't make much sense. But in terms of this royal family, it actually makes a great deal of sense because they had just been kicked out of Persia, as I say, in AD 4. They didn't have a palace to stay in, so they might have been in humble lodgings. And of course, the Persian Magi would have been interested in any birth at this time because the child being born would have been a potential king of Persia and also a potential king of Egypt, because I say their heritage is
Okay.
out of Egypt.
But if he was a king in Persia, wouldn't that not make him a Muslim?
Well, no, Islam wasn't invented for another 600 years. So
Okay.
at that time, Persia would have been Jewish, Christian, and Zoroastrian. It's not well known that a lot of the Middle East was Jewish at this time
No, it's
because
not.
of the Babylonian exile, because the Jews had been exiled there in 600 BC, and they had actually been very successful. And so a lot of the commerce in
Mm-hmm.
the Middle East was actually done by the Jews up until 1947, 1950, when all of the Jews of Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq were all thrown out of that region on yet another exodus. They seem to have a remarkable number of these exoduses, but there we go.
Yeah, they sure do.
So yes, at that time, that those lands would have been partially Jewish, and these particular monarchs, the monarchs of Edessa, were Jewish, and they became Nazarene Jews. We have this from the Talmud. So the Talmud says that Queen Helena, who was the queen of Edessa, she became a Nazarene Jew in the AD 50s. She went through an initiation to become a Nazarene Jew. And this brings us on to another connection that Queen Helena gave the famine relief money to Judea in AD 48 when there was a great famine in Judea. And it's well known from history that the famine relief money to alleviate that famine came from Queen Helena of Edessa. But if you look into Acts of the Apostles, you will find that famine relief money was given by Agabus, a prophet called Agabus. But it's quite obvious that prophet was actually King Abgarus, who was the husband of Queen Helena. King Abgarus was the king of Edessa. And so he appears in Acts of the Apostles. And I'll just get a quick reference for you here. So this is a famous little verse from Acts 11:28, where Agabus prophesies this famine and sends famine relief money down to Judea. But the interesting thing about this is that this famine relief money was sent by the hands of Saul and Barnabas, the two apostles, the famous apostles from the gospel story. And that's interesting because it means that Saul and Barnabas were ambassadors of the Edessan monarchy. And that's interesting. Yes.
Now, I was just going to ask you, this Jesus, did he perform miracles? Did he raise the dead? Where do all these come from? When Christ brought Lazarus back from the dead and the other miracles that he performed.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I've been through the same ceremony myself. And essentially, it's just a Masonic third degree. Any Masons out there who have been through the third degree, that is the raising of Lazarus, is exactly the same. That's why Lazarus comes out of the tomb hoodwinked, much the same as you do in present ceremony. That is why Jesus was known as a carpenter. Of course, he wasn't called a carpenter. Within the Greek, he's known as a tekton. And a tekton is an architect, a speculative architect. In the Greek, it still means Freemason. So Jesus was effectively the grand. Yeah, he was a Mason. He was the Grand Master of the Judean Lodge. And so the raising of Lazarus was just a third degree raising. In exactly
Boy,
the
that
same
opens
fashion.
up a lot of doors to a lot of thinking, to a lot of connections.
Yes, indeed.
You could actually look at that saying, all right, so the Masons or the Masonic lodges are responsible for this side of Christianity.
Yeah, Jesus would have been a Mason. That's why he was known as the cornerstone. That's why his primary disciple was known as Peter the Stone, because it's all sort of Masonic imagery, and he probably was the keeper of the sacred stone, because there was a sacred stone running around this region at this time, which was known as the Elagabal stone. Elagabal just means the mountain of God, because it was cone shaped and it looked like a small mountain. And it was owned by the Edessan monarchy. And the interesting thing that is on the coins of Edessa in northern Syria, we have images of this, but in the Edessan images, it's a square box. And of course, that is the Ark of the Covenant, in which the sacred stone was kept. And so we have images of that.
And the sacred stone can be interpreted as the Ten Commandments, the tablets of the Ten Commandments?
It's probably linked, yes, to those sacred stones that were put inside the Ark of the Covenant. But we get, rather than being a tablet, we get images of this sacred stone when it went down to Syria, and then was taken to Rome. And it's a conical stone. It looks like a little tiny pyramid, but conical. It was probably only about 50, 60 centimeters high, so it was quite small. But it was supposed to be a meteorite, so it was probably metallic. And it became sacred, I think, maybe because it was magnetic, and magnetism was a very strange force which people maybe didn't understand. You know, if you put a sword near this stone, maybe it was attracted to the stone, which would be very strange. It would be as if, you know, the hand of God had just come out and taken the sword out of your hand. But we have images of this, and this stone was taken to Rome by Emperor Elagabalus. Elagabalus took the name of this stone because he was a priest of this particular stone. And he took this stone to Rome. And so we've got images of this stone on Roman coins. And it was linked to the phoenix because it had come in as a fiery meteorite, you know, burning through the sky. And so it was linked to the phoenix, and it's embossed with an image of the phoenix.
And could that be where the writing on the tablets that God was supposed to have given to Moses came in, the fire that was written, and the fact that God handed down the tablets on Mount Sinai?
Yes, because this stone was regarded as a piece of the sun that had broken off and came down to earth. And of course, if you're venerating the sun god, then it is like a son of God that's broken off and come down to earth. It's come down from the heavens above. So yes, people would regard it as being sacred.
Ralph, stand by. I've got to take my final break. We'll be back shortly. Fascinating conversation with you, Ralph. Thank you so much for joining us. And Ralph and I will be back on the other side of this short break as we wrap up this hour. And tonight, here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Welcome back, everyone. During that brief break, Ralph, it was kind of like, why the lies throughout history? Why not just be honest with us? I understand there's a control factor there, big time. But does God really exist, or is he a manifestation of the minds of the old leaders in order to use this control that they've needed to have over their people?
Yes, I try and steer away from that within my books. So I just look at the history and I leave any of the spirituality to the reader. So you can read my books as just pure history, looking at why this story was written. And if you want to put a sort of religious spiritual layer on top of that, you can, because it doesn't really change that story. As I say, the only difference it makes is that this particular character, the Jesus character, was much more powerful. He was a real king who was involved in a real revolt against Rome. And then the politics comes into play, because, as I say, Rome didn't want you to know about this revolt. They didn't want you to know that people could revolt against Rome, and so they buried the story, which was convenient for them. But then when the popes took over as being the new emperors, basically, the Pope is essentially the emperor of Rome, they didn't want you to know this story either. And so the story got covered up. And then there was a further cover up in a way, because we move on perhaps to Arthurian Legend, which is one of my latest books, that this story was discovered. I'm pretty sure that this story was discovered in 1098 AD. That was the time of the First Crusade. So the First Crusade set off in 1096. And where did it go to? Well, it went to the corner, the northeast corner of the Mediterranean at modern Antioch. But it didn't go to Jerusalem. I mean, they should have turned right and gone down to Jerusalem. That was the whole point of the Crusades, you would have thought. So where did the First Crusade go to? It went to Edessa. This city that I keep talking about as being, the city that was governed by the Jesus character, King Jesus Manu of Edessa, King Jesus Emmanuel of Judea. The First Crusade went to Edessa first. It was the first city to be liberated from Muslim control in 1098. Why did they go there? I think one of the reasons is that they knew some of this story. And if you were going to find out any interesting facts about the gospel story, they weren't going to be found in Jerusalem. They were going to be found in Edessa. And I think that's the secret that they discovered, which formed the Knights Templar, because the Knights Templar had secrets. And we don't know what those secrets were. But of course, if they had found a history in Edessa or a genealogy in Edessa that covered this secular story that said Jesus was a real king of Edessa in the AD 60s, then that would be powerful information, but that would also be heretical information. And how would you tell that story in the Middle Ages? You wouldn't be able to. You would be burnt at the stake if you told that story of a secular Jesus. And so what I think they did is, to get around this problem, they crafted the Arthurian story, because the Arthurian story mimics the gospel story in terms of this, semi-sacred king who is fighting the Romans, just as the secular Jesus character, was fighting the Romans in Judea. So I think they recast this story back onto this Arthurian character in Britain, just to keep it away from, the Near East. And that became Arthurian Legend, because, of course, Arthurian Legend follows this same story. So within one of the manuscripts, it says that there were 3 tables that were made. The first table was the round table of Jesus and his 12 disciples.
Right.
It was a round table, not a rectangular one. The second table was the table of Joseph of Arimathea and his 12 disciples. And the third table was the round table of King Arthur and his 12 knights. So the Arthur and the 12 knights is exactly the same as Jesus and his 12 disciples.
And then we go back to that chart that picture of the horoscope that was found in the synagogue, because it also has the 12 houses of the zodiac. Yes.
So I've just shared another image with you. So this is the round table of Winchester. So this is a real round table. This comes from the it was there. This comes from Winchester, and it's a very early. Yeah, that's the one. This is the round table of Edward I. So this is going back to, when was Edward I? He's 13th century. So this is pretty old, this table. This is like 700 years old. And of course, this is the round table as they thought it of King Arthur, except the character here is actually, that's actually Henry VIII drawn there, but there we go. But the round table didn't actually look like this. it looked like, if I can just flip this up, it looked more like this. So this comes from a film, of course, and this is Arthurian Round Table. And it looked more like this with the hole in the center. Why? Because the king sits in the center. So this is a zodiac, as you say. So the Jesus character and his 12 disciples, or the Arthur character and his 12 knights, is simply a zodiac. And the central character, the Helios character, as we saw in that zodiac, sits in the very center of the zodiac. So the Jesus character.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Aren't there also 12 gods in Greek mythology?
Yes, it's following the same sort of story.
Right.
So it's all based upon the zodiac, and that is why we get the name King Arthur, because of course they couldn't call this guy Jesus. Of course, that would give the game away if you're trying to cover up this story and retell this story in the Middle Ages. So they called him Arthur. Where does that come from? It comes from the zodiac, because when you're drawing a zodiac, you can either draw it with Helios, the sun god, in the center, as we saw in that zodiac, or you can draw it looking up at the heavens above at the North Pole. And if you look at the North Pole, the major constellation at the North Pole is Ursa Major, the Great Bear, which is Arthur, because Arthur means the Great Bear. That's his form. It comes from the Greek Arcteros, which is where we get the name Arctic from. It comes from the Greek, meaning the bear. And so that's where we get the name King Arthur from. So again, the zodiac, you can draw it either with the sun in the center, Helios, who is the son of God, because in Greek that either means Helios, the sun god, or Huios, meaning the sun. So you can get the same comparison that you do in English between the sun god and the son of God. That works in the Greek as well as it does in the English. Or you can look up the northern heavens, and the central character of the zodiac becomes Arthur, the bear, the great bear. So it's the same name for the same person. And that's where we get Arthurian legend from. So I wrote an entire book looking at these comparisons between Arthurian legend and the gospel story, and showing that Arthurian legend is not really as people understand it, because a lot of it is actually based in the Middle East. So if you read some of these manuscripts, even things like Wolfram von Eschenbach in his Parsifal, he starts the story in Mesopotamia. So the story of King Arthur starts with the father of Percival, Sir Percival, one of the Knights of the Round Table, in Mesopotamia as a knight working for a king, King Barus, in Mesopotamia. It's not quite the story that people imagine. And then we have some very heretical things in some of these manuscripts, where some of them say that Arthurian, the original author of Arthurian legend, was Josephus Flavius. And that's a problem, because and some of the people who have researched Arthurian legend actually mention this. They say, well, the text says that the original text was written by Josephus Flavius, but that's obviously an error, because you cannot have a 1st century author writing about a 6th century king. So that's just a mistake in the manuscript.
Ralph, I hate to do this, but our time for tonight has just come up. I'd love to have you back on to continue this. I'm totally amazed every time you come on the show, and I just can't thank you enough for sharing this most interesting information with us tonight. And quickly, let our listeners know where they can find out more about you and where they can buy your books.
Yes, well, they're all available on Amazon. My website is edfu-books.com, so edu-books.com. I have quite an active Facebook page, which is Facebook Ralph Ellis.144, and that will take you on to my Facebook site. But yes, I'm mostly online now, so mostly it's out of Amazon, I'm afraid, but it makes it much easier for authors like myself.
Well, again, Ralph, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to the next time you're here with us. And let's not make it so long a time apart.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much, Rob.
Take care of yourself, my friend. Exo Nation, my guest this hour has been Ralph Ellis, and what a gentleman. And go online, buy his books, read it for yourself. And then we have to keep asking the question, why the suppression of truth? We'll get the answer one day. Well, that's it for tonight. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. My studio producer, the one and only Craig West, my wife and senior executive producer, Laura Rogers. Thank you, sweetheart. And thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight, taking time out of your day, your night, no matter where you are in this great big world of ours, to be with us here in the X Zone. So until next we meet, please remember to always keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night, everyone.